I don't want it to be recording. We're recording now. Very good. And I think that you're able to do the screen because I have you as a co-host.
Yep, I should be able to share my screen when it's time.
So I want to just take a minute while everyone is coming into our room to say hello and greet everyone and let them know that we are very proud here in Volusia County, Volusia and Flagler, to have a SCORE office with some tremendous mentors that work really very hard day and night. So if you're not familiar with SCORE, we've been around for 50 years. We're an arm of the Small Business Administration. We receive some funding from Congress, and we're here to really help businesses at any stage of your business life. And that is our tagline, every stage of your life, because people think, oh, I only need it for the beginning, but you also have an exit strategy that you need. And we do have a SCORE workshop coming up on exactly that, how to exit your business. So SCORE is made up of mentors. I'm a certified mentor. So you find a mentor that is what your need is, if it's e-commerce, if it's packaging, if it's law, if it's attorney, if it's accounting, whatever that may be, you find someone that has business experience that has been trained the SCORE way, and they will mentor you and at no charge at all. So we're very proud to be very active here in Volusia County. Pre-COVID, we would be having our workshops over at the Daytona College UCF building. SCORE just moved into the incubator building, which is very exciting, at the Daytona International Airport. So we do have an office set up there. SCORE also does workshops like tonight. You're welcome to go on to score.org and look up workshops, templates, lean Canva. You need a business template, pre-recordings, recordings from before, webinars, whatever you need information, whether it's social media or if it's how to make a proper phone call, whatever it could be, we're here to help. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we need more mentors. We also need someone like Daralyse, who is a subject matter expert. And so Daralyse is coming in and she's volunteering right now to teach you her knowledge. So if you have a particular knowledge that you would like to share, we welcome you to come in. And then we also have SCORE speakers that go out and do presentations like the exit one that we have. So we offer a variety of different information. Our website is like an onion, so there's layers and layers of great information in there. So keep looking. If you want a mentor, you go onto the website and do Find a Mentor. We are recording tonight, so very excited to host Daralyse Lyons, who's coming all the way from Pennsylvania. I'm going to have Daralyse introduce herself in a minute. If you have any information that you need or questions you ask, please put it in the chat room, and we'll make sure at the end that we answer it. And this recording will then now go on YouTube afterwards so that we could share it. So Daralyse, it's now 5:04, and though we don't have a lot of people here, we know that this is going to go out, and your information that you're sharing with us is so important. So will you first, and I'm gonna take my face off. Would you first explain, and you know, as great as I am not with a bio, to be honest with you, I would like for you to introduce yourself and let us know what it is that you do. Let us know what you do and why you're speaking to us and your knowledge. And so, everyone, Daralyse Lyons, woo!
Well, thank you so much, Adrienne, and it's great to be here. And thank you to everyone who's watching this and participating. I feel like Adrienne brought like a one-woman ruckus, or it was great. I felt like I got a whole audience was cheering for me in that moment. But I will say my name is Daralyse Lyons, and I'm a biracial journalist. I'm an activist. I'm an author. I've written and published over 20 books, I believe now, and counting. And I'm an expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm one of the creators of the Demystifying Diversity Podcast. And the Demystifying Diversity Podcast, what it looks at is it looks at a wide range of topics pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's an audio journalism project. I got some of my training and my background from WHYY in Philadelphia, which is a branch of NPR. And so really, I'm interested in stories, and I'm interested in sitting down with people from all walks of life and all stratospheres of society, and really finding, the interconnectedness of oppression, and really pointing to, I call it solutions-oriented journalism, because I point to the problems, but then I also really want to focus on solutions and what can we do? What can we do individually? What can we do in our corporations and our, interpersonal relationships? How can we, as a society, sort of find and embrace our shared humanity and bring out the best in people? So while I do have a personal interest in these issues, being a biracial woman, I also believe that diversity shapes how all of us see life, and our exposure to different ways of thinking and navigating the world, and just different perspectives. So in season 1, I interviewed 128 people, and we're beginning season 2 now. And I think just to give you a little bit of a context for this presentation today and for everything that I'm going to be talking about, I just wanted to share our visual trailer so that you can get a sense of sort of when I talk about the intersection of identity or the interconnectedness of oppression, like what I'm talking about. So this will just be a couple of minutes, and can everyone see my screen? If people could just post in the chat.
Yeah, so we see the white part of your screen so far.
Perfect, great. And I'm sharing sound, and we will begin.
Now more than ever, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront of the conversation. Every day, we see evidence of the devastating impact of racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, fat phobia, gender discrimination, and many other forms of othering. People are hurting, and the first step to embracing our shared humanity is to listen to those we perceive to be different than ourselves. Join us this September for the first season of the Demystifying Diversity Podcast, where you will hear expert opinions, interviews, and personal narratives of pain, resilience, and hope.
You can't have these kind of conversations without eventually getting to the point of the original sin of our country, which was slavery.
I have friends, I have actual people in my life whose family members have been killed because of Islamophobia.
My parents were both in concentration camps, and they suffered, very great trauma.
Hate crimes against LGBTQIA people have only risen as we've gotten rights.
I don't think eating disorders are really about desiring thinness. I think they're about desiring desirability.
When somebody is trying to speak about you without you, things can go horribly wrong.
By listening to the voices of others, we're taking the first step to bringing about change.
Listening is a choice, and all action is a personal choice, right, to move in one direction or another. And so I think, at the very least, a generous listener has taken the action to listen, which is huge.
Season 1 of the Demystifying Diversity Podcast starts in September. Subscribe now for free wherever you get your podcasts, and join us in our mission to create a more inclusive world.
Yeah, great. So thank you all so much. One of the reasons that I wanted to share that is because, I found when I started doing this work in the space of diversity that there was so much great work that was out there, but a lot of it seemed to be focused on, one segment of society, like, certain people's lived experience. And I think that's really, really important. But what I wanted to do was create work that was a microcosm of the macrocosm, and that sort of was diverse within itself. And so one of the interviews that I conducted for season 1 of the podcast, I sat down with a woman named Salima Suswell, who is a Muslim rights activist, and she's a speaker, and she's just a powerful, she was appointed by Governor Tom Wolf she's just an amazing person, and she's run a lot of diversity and cultural competency trainings. And one of the things that she said, she starts every single talk that she does by making the statement, and she says it's a pretty provocative statement, but that racial literacy and cultural competency are about more than teaching white people how to treat Black people. And I really took that to heart. And I think that as we, because we're going to engage, I guess, in a little bit of a Q&A in a moment, really start to delve a little bit more deeply into these issues. But I think it's important to set the context for what I mean when I talk about diversity. And the way that I see diversity is that it represents all the ways that people are different and all the variance and the variety that make individuals or groups unique. And these differences can be race, they can be ethnicity, gender, age, religion, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, language, physical appearance. There's so many characteristics and identity markers and affiliations that make us who we are. And no person sort of fits within any one box, right? We all have different intersections of identities. There's someone that I interviewed, Alyssa Kraut, who works at the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia, and her grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and her father was born in a displaced persons camp. And Alyssa says that we're all like Venn diagrams, and we all have these overlapping spheres of sameness. And if we can focus on sort of what's in the middle of the diagram, it's easier to find those spaces of connection and to really become invested in one another. So that's the approach that I take to dealing with diversity. And, I know that SCORE is concerned with the business ramifications of this and the business implications, and why diversity is important in terms of business and in terms of profitability and corporate bottom lines is that the more people that are in a room, making a Zoom room, as it were right now, making decisions and adding their voices to conversations and contributing, the more innovative organizations will become. And, when I'm working with corporations, I invite them to shift their paradigm from thinking about diversity as being something that, a company does for those perhaps like a marginalized community, or that they're doing for the person that they're hiring, and to really look at the value that is added to an organization when we increase the number of perspectives that are there sort of thinking about solving various problems. And I'll give you an example from my own life. So I'm a member of Comedy Sports Philadelphia. We're an improv comedy organization. We're a nationally and internationally recognized franchise. And, we've been doing comedy for a long time. And when the COVID pandemic hit the United States and things shut down in March, we moved all of our performances to virtual performances and have been doing virtual performances ever since. And we've kind of been doing them in the way that we've been doing them, and it's great. We've gotten like a really good reception. But I recently, within the last couple of months, I went to a conference, and at this conference, they had an ASL interpreter and they had closed captioning. And I went back to Comedy Sports and I said, I think we would be more accessible if we offered closed captioning at our shows. And so one of the things that we're implementing is that beginning in January, we'll be implementing closed captioning. And we're also looking into being able to do, closed captioning but in Spanish language, or, that's translated. And those are really, it turns out that they were pretty easy things for us to implement as a corporate, as a sort of organization. But it's something that none of us would have thought about. We hadn't thought about it since March, just because it was outside of our frame of reference. But if we had, company members maybe that had more experience with people in the deaf community, or that maybe, had been exposed to translation in some form or another, right? Like we would have probably thought of that sooner and implemented it sooner. And so I think that's a huge problem with homogenous organizations and corporations is that none of us can see what we can't see. We can't see what's outside of our frame of reference. And, you know, I think biases are really so problematic, because if we're approaching relationships, if we're approaching, you know, experiences with these biases that are operating underneath the surface, then we can't really see another person's potential, and we can't see their capacity for innovation and contribution. And, you know, this might seem abundantly obvious, but if you have people with different perspectives and ideologies and experiences, you know, in a room, that's great and it's wonderful and it's part of the way there. But unless you really open yourself up to embracing and appreciating those differences, it's not enough, right? It's not enough to just have those Venn diagrams, those overlapping spheres. You know, we need to also really like find ways to embrace one another. And I think intersectionality of identity, you know, recognizing those intersections is probably one of the most important ways, recognizing the intersections within ourselves first and then within others, is one of the most important ways to move forward. And, you know, I'm many things. I think probably everyone in this Zoom room right now is many, many things. And I think, you know, embracing that intersection and those interconnections of identities is essential. And so I have, I'm just going to see if I can pull it up on my computer, but see if this will share the screen. But I really wanted to share this one other thing with you all that I think really brings this home. So let's see. Can you all see that?
Yeah. Okay. So we see your website, internet. Oh, now we've got.
You're seeing that?
Yes, that we share, all that we share. Ooh.
Perfect. Okay, great. So I am going to play this and.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
Yeah. And so I loved sharing that video because I think that, especially when we're thinking about diversity and equity and inclusion as it pertains to businesses and as it pertains to a corporate culture, I think it's about finding that balance, right, between what we share and what we have in common and our own sort of like unique talents and experiences and ways of looking at the world. And I think that video is such a powerful illustration of bringing seemingly disparate people together from a space of cooperation and collaboration and embracing, what they have in common. And even, there's that one moment in the video where that one person steps out into the space and they're the only one, that has a certain identity marker, and like everybody, is cheering that person on for their bravery and for their uniqueness. And so I think it's really essential to begin to look at, what do we have in common? What can we share with one another? And then also maybe, what don't we have in common? And so one thing that I would love everyone to just take a moment to think about is a group against whom maybe you hold a particular kind of bias, right? And this can be, members of a certain gender or a certain religion or a certain race. And we all have biases. We have biases that we interject, into one another. I did an episode about body shaming in season 1, and people spoke about their own interjected biases about different body types. So we all have these biases, and I want to just encourage everyone to kind of take a moment to think about a group of people against who you hold a bias. And I want you to just breathe into the reality that we all have biases. We all have things that we judge about ourselves and others. And there's really not a problem, I think, with having that bias. It's not being willing to examine it and not being able to challenge it. And one thing that I really encourage people to do is if they hold a bias against certain people or a certain group, is to try to find areas of intersection, right? So whether that be, I guess I'll give everyone the homework assignment to, within the next 24 hours, find someone from within that community with whom you have something in common, and focus on that commonality and see how you can embrace and honor and celebrate that commonality. So whether it's looking on, YouTube and finding someone in that community who has a really inspiring story where maybe you connect in some way, or looking into a book, or even maybe a friend or a member of a community that you've met and had a conversation with, and you held the bias against that person and then realize we're both parents, or we're both this, or we're both that. I really just want people to challenge themselves to, within the next 24 hours, find an area of commonality with someone that you might have a belief, is fundamentally different than you. Because the truth is that the more that we can, dehumanization is a precursor to all racism, all discrimination, right? So the more that we can embrace our shared humanity, I find that the more that we can demystify diversity, and the more we can find those connections and intersections, and that is empowering personally, and it's certainly empowering professionally. But I don't want to use this whole time to just talk at you. I really want this to be engaging. So Adrienne, I would love if you'd come back in and we can chat a little. You can ask me any questions, and I would love to kind of open it up to attendees and talk to them.
Thanks, Daralyse. The video made me cry. It's so beautiful. It's a realization. I used to use a similar tactic with the anti-bullying program I taught. I was trained by Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul and Mary. my my kind of age group. So, and I want you to know that April Cummings wrote, these are fantastic videos. I've used similar videos in my training. If anyone would like to come on the screen, we invite you to come on. I could give you the ability to share your camera. So I'll go with the first question. So growing up in a family business, I remember that there was a point in time where that I don't even know, was it the state laws or the government laws that you had to have a certain amount of people around the table that were diverse, that were reflected diversity, but it always seemed that it was, and you get points or some kind of credit, right? If you okay, and so you're checking people off a list, that it really, I don't really understand. I was too young to really get it, but I would find out that you would have someone would come in from the state and they would double check everything and make sure. So they kind of wanted a diversity, but is that still going on? And what did that look like? And did that even hurt the education and what we wanted to do?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think one of the problems with that sort of like, check the boxes for diversity is that what it does is it really, it closes people off to the fact that diversity is actually incredibly valuable for an organization and a corporation, right? And I think it's like the difference between doing homework. I think about it as like, if someone were a ballet dancer, let's say, and they were doing it because they loved to do it and it was inspiring to them, like they would be way more motivated to practice, right? And to go to class and all of those sort of things. Versus, if someone's doing it because their parents are making them, right? And I think that's what happens a lot of times when you have these sort of like, kind of standardized programs on diversity that are trying to remedy a problem, but they're not really looking at the fact that like diversity is valuable for an organization. And the more that corporations can start to recognize the value that their variety and difference brings, the more they become personally invested. So it becomes like that ballet dancer that you kind of can't get to stop dancing and like eat dinner or whatever, because they're so lit up by it. And I find that when I've started working with corporations and organizations, and we've really done that paradigm shift, so diversity has become less of a let's check that box, and more of a, ooh, like, this is great, because if someone's thinking about this differently, like for example, gender is a great one. I recently was speaking to a woman who was in a meeting, and it was an organization that had previously like been pretty much male led, right? And so they came up with this product line, which like, I mean, it was fine. It was a good idea, but they completely neglected the fact that like it was only appealing to one specific gender identity, right? Like there was no crossover appeal. And so suddenly, now that this woman was in the room making decisions and adding her voice to the conversation, she was able to say, well, yeah, but that product won't work for women because blah, blah, blah. And then they found a more innovative solution. And so I think those are the things when you can point to those examples and get corporations to really think about like, okay, you can stay homogenous, but then you're not really serving people. I think then they become personally invested, and then diversity actually starts to mean something as opposed to just being this meaningless kind of tokenism. Yeah. And I saw a hand go up, but oh yay, hi Monica.
Hi, good. I'm just so glad to be a part of this webinar. I just wanted to show my face and let you see me as, the person I am. I do have a physical disability, as I'm sure you can see, and I'm one who is very outgoing and very outspoken. So I just wanted to show my face and thank you for offering this webinar to us, because I've dealt with so many situations in my life where this issue has been it's been very discouraging for me because even though I am an educated woman, I have a bachelor's degree in social welfare. I've gone through my master's program as a community counselor. I have raised my own child. She's an adult right now, and she's very much so a productive citizen. And I'm so proud of her and what she has accomplished so far in her life. And so, in terms of working for companies and other and organizations, I found that even though I've been able to get work throughout my adult life, it's been difficult to stay on the job for a long period of time. And when I first started my career in social services, I had become a young mother at the same time. Well, soon after I initially started my career. And I just found that even though I worked for social service agencies, and in particular, the organizations that actually hired, they were mandated to hire individuals with disabilities and to serve their needs, to be able to meet their needs, to serve them and to meet their needs. I still have been very disappointed in how the able-bodied community, those who do not have any physical limitations or mental or cognitive limitations, how the biases still show up. They still show up. So, I mean, I've been fortunate and I've been very blessed and fortunate in my life to acquire quite a bit of the things that I would like to have, but it's been in spurts and I've lost a lot as well. So it's been like a, tug of war type of situation.
And I think thank you so much, Monica, for being willing to share about your personal experiences, because I think that's the most meaningful type of sharing that we can have, right? Is like when we can relate as people, and just like strip all the filters and the identity markers away and just be people having a conversation. And I'm so sorry though, that it seems like, I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, it seems like the people's attitudes often felt like it made it so even if you were in a space, you didn't really feel embraced or included in a meaningful way at times. Is that kind of accurate?
Correct. And it hasn't been that way like all of my life. There have been some employers or supervisors that have embraced my total self, my total being in a in a way where I felt so respected and valued. But there have been more, that more situations than the positive, and more negative than the positive.
And that's so sad to me because I mean, it's every person, it should be a right to be respected, right? Like that should just be a baseline, and then above respect is maybe like admiration and love and all that. But to feel disrespected, it's just like that baseline is not even being met. And especially in a workplace environment, most of us spend 40 hours or more. Like I spend a lot more than 40 hours. Most of us spend more than 40 hours a week at work. And so, I mean, of course, it wouldn't be an environment that would be like, it doesn't become a tenable situation if that baseline of respect isn't even being met. And so I'm so glad that you came on and that you shared that. And hopefully, people watching can sort of think about that and reflect on that and try to make, I think it's challenging and painful if the onus is always on the individual to advocate for themselves without, allyship. And so I think it's important to have that mix of allies and, individuals who are affected by whatever the issue is, sort of championing that. Or do you, I guess my last question for you is, do you have like a plan of action now or a community of support now? Like, where are you with it now?
Okay, yes. I was just about to share where I'm at in this venture, this space that I'm in my life, because it is kind of, it's an odd situation for me, only because I'm working for an employer that embrace the organization is supposed to be empowering individuals that have disabilities in terms of trying to meet their vocational needs, and also to employ some of the individuals within the community of persons with disabilities. So I'm one of those individuals that, have been fortunate to become employed. Again, I mean, it was kind of a nice gap in time where I was not employed in my field of study, my profession, but I was doing other things like Ubering, Uber Eats, and becoming a secret shopper, different, situations like that. But I really wanted to get back into the thing that I love to do, and that's to serve others in the social service field. So I'm there. Unfortunately, I'm not getting the work that I would like to be getting to really, feel valued on my job. So that's basically where I'm at right now. And it's been almost a year since I've become employed with this company. So I'm just kind of a little frustrated.
Gosh, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know that I have any answers, but I'm grateful that I'm so grateful that you shared your experience. And I think it's beautiful that you are working in your field. And I'm sure that you're, an example to other people in the community that you serve, because you're supporting people, who you can hopefully like relate to and empathize with. And I think that's so meaningful. And my hope is that you get more work. Because clearly you're a wealth of resources and information and education and, and have overcome a lot in order to be where you are. And I'm just very grateful that you shared, and I'm sure your daughter is as proud of you as you are of her. So thank you so much for popping on and sharing.
You're so welcome. So I will let you continue. It's been really great listening to you. I'm learning a lot. Thank you
so much.
Monica, your smile is absolutely so beautiful. It like brightens. It makes me feel good, even though what you're saying makes me feel sad. Daralyse and Monica, I want to just say this to you. When I was growing up, I always thought that the person who had a disability was the one that didn't have the ability to actually love someone and respect someone for who they are. So I thought, my gosh, what is wrong with that person that doesn't see the beauty and the brains and everything that, Monica, we see right now? That to me, when I was younger, I thought they were the ones that had a problem. So it didn't make sense to me.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Stay on though.
I will. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to just take you back in, and then you are beautiful. And then I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm going to change you back. There we go. That was great. Thank you, Monica. Daralyse, I feel like the media has not helped us. So, I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but from just watching the media, they're not really helping what we need to be as Americans all together.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because I'm sort of a member of the media in a way, but also like speaking out against some of it. I think that there's a lot of different factors. One is that, journalism and news media it's also a business, and it's also driven a lot, I think, by that bottom line and by profitability, and so as so many things are. And I remember not too long ago, I pitched a real feel-good story to a news editor, and he said to me, he's like, "Oh, Daralyse, I love that story and I would love to do it, but we've just shown that when we sort of present these positive news things, people change the channel. People don't watch." So I think it's, I think there's a lot of factors that are at play in terms of why what's being presented on the media isn't always an accurate reflection of really like what we should be seeing. I think the same is at play even like if we go to reality TV, let's say, or just like TV in general. Like, I think representation is a huge problem. Social media is also a huge problem. Like, we're not really seeing the true experience of human lives being reflected back at us. We're often sort of seeing members of a certain community portrayed in one specific way or another, and not portrayed in their richness and and inclusivity of experience. So yeah, I mean, the media, there are a lot of problems there. There are a lot of trainings that are being done to sort of help with bias in media and representation. I think a trend that we're seeing, and I know I recently attended a journalistic conference, and they were talking about how, I think that the current political climate really has caused the media to do a lot of self-reflection, because it used to be where journalists would just sort of report what was being said. And now they're doing a lot of training on the fact that, like, if you report hate speech without any sort of, without describing it as hate speech and presenting the counter arguments and those kinds of things, that you're actually perpetrating that hate speech, right? And so there's just a lot of work right now being done in the field of media and in the field of journalism in order to think about, like, how do we report in fairer, more equitable ways. But I think that journalists are also people, and the media is also comprised of people, and so they're going to make mistakes. But I think it's important, to call people out when they get it wrong. And one of the things that we're seeing is, like, there was in journalism, there's been a lot of like misgendering of people, a lot of sort of labeling trans individuals with the wrong gender. That's a thing that happens far too frequently. And, you know, and those media organizations that are, when they do that, like often members of communities that are injured by that will rally around and will sort of demand apologies. And so I think it's really important. You know, the media should be policing itself, but I think that, you know, like anything else, whether it's our political leaders, whether it's members of the media, whether it's TV, I think, like, you know, individuals really, it's important to recognize that if something is wrong, you know, if something isn't right about what an organization is doing, you know, it's important for us to speak up and speak out if we can, you know, if we have it within our capacity and within our sort of like, you know, ability, because it can be very draining to do that work. So I don't want people to feel that they have to, but I think also feeling like it is a right, like, to stand up for ourselves, but not necessarily a responsibility.
That's really interesting. So you know, I think of anytime we want to make changes, we should start with our youngest, so our children, and getting into the school systems and making sure that they understand. And it can't just be like, okay, today's the day we're going to learn, open your books. Okay, close your books. Okay, in 6 months, we'll do that again. It has to be continuous. It has to be part of the conversation, because what's happening is the kids are feeling it. They see it all day. They're dealing with it all day long. And then they go to high school, and then they go to college, and then they work with us. And now they're in the workplace, and it's still continuing. So what are your thoughts on making sure, what do you see for the future of really making the changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. I think that to say, you know, like, okay, we need to change our educational systems. Yes, absolutely, we need to do that. But then children go home. They go home to their families. They go home to their, you know, grandparents. They hear things. You know, children are sponges for information. What they see on the television sort of shapes how they perceive the world. So I think just to kind of think that, I mean, I would love to be naive enough to think like, oh, well, if we just change the educational system and we focused on the beauty of diversity, like, that's great. But then what do you do when you go home and your racist uncle makes a comment at the dinner table and nobody says to him, we don't say that in this house, and that's not right, and here's why, you know? So I think it's very important. I saw a note, is it April or April? April said that, yeah, these things have to be modeled. And so, yeah, I think that it's sort of a continual thing. I also think that sometimes we do ourselves as adults a disservice to think that, oh, well, if you don't like learn it early, you're never gonna learn it. My experience with people is that they can change like that once something becomes personally important and once we become like personally invested. And so one of the reasons I do the work that I do, and I focus on sort of telling stories, is that when you can really get to someone's heart, you know, I mean, Monica's ability to come on and bravely share a story and share experiences, like, I think that makes the difference. I think that the ability I interviewed someone recently who shared about how when he was growing up as a kid on the playground, he's a Black man, and people would say like, oh, don't touch me, I don't want the black to rub off, like horrible things that people would say. And this man posted on his social media about it not too long ago, and like members of his own family, because he's now in an interracial relationship, and so members of his own family said, oh my God, I said that to people on the playground, to them, you know, and just like making amends to him, who's a family member, even though they didn't say it to him, but like having it become personal to those people who walked around with those racist views for years and years and years. Suddenly, you know, they're a member of their own family is a person of color, and they love that person, and it like strips away those filters, right? And so I think that the work that we really need to do it's continual. It happens at every age and stage of life. And I think that, like, yes, it's very important to educate our children, but we can't do that if we don't educate ourselves. right? And some of the communities that I've found to actually be the most empathetic, I'm doing an episode on ageism right now, and I found that a lot of people that I've interviewed who have lived through discrimination in various ways, like I've had the good fortune, I've had the humbling experience of being able to sit with Holocaust survivors, and every single person that I've interviewed as a Holocaust survivor has made a comment to me about, and it's horrible that kids are being kept in cages at the borders, or, it's horrible, I can't believe what's happening to Black Americans in terms of violence, or have you heard about what's happening to Indigenous communities, right? And so I think there's a willingness when people have really suffered to look at the suffering of others and to open their hearts and minds. And so, yeah, I think this is lifelong work, and I think it's very, very important for all of us to be doing. And I think where I think it's a little different with kids is that kids, we as adults can choose to filter our information and can choose the resources that we seek, but children don't have that ability. And so if we're not making conscious efforts to expose them to the correct sources and the correct information and to open their eyes to the beauty of diversity, they kind of can't do it for themselves. And so I think that's where with children it is so important, because they don't have that capacity to choose what comes in terms of information.
It's interesting in Hollywood, Florida, the Holocaust Museum and Documentation Center, what they did was they really created an event bringing in Holocaust survivors or the children of the survivors, teaming them up with a local high school so they could share their story of what they went through, and so that the students understood what the picture of hate really looks like.
Yeah.
Very specific emotions. So that, because when you really see what they went through and what hate can kill, hate kills, it really made a difference. Can I ask you, sorry, this is such an important conversation, and my being Jewish has been tough for me. I grew up with pennies thrown at me and really embarrassed to be Jewish and scared and all of that. But I want to switch gears for a second. I want to ask you about the she, her, and hers that you have. I see that often. I have an understanding of it, but just in case someone doesn't, can you explain what that means and why someone would use that, and just the understanding of the pronouns, right?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for being emotional and being willing to reveal those feelings, because I believe that vulnerability is the key to this work. And I think it's so essential that you were willing to share, and I think it really, I think it's great modeling. There was a comment in the chat about modeling, and I think that when people are willing to lead with vulnerability, that is the way forward. So thank you. And in terms of the question about pronouns, so there's a lot of, I think there has been, and we're seeing this change. Luckily we're seeing this change. But for a long time, there's been this false idea that gender is a binary, right? So that there's either she or him, he or her, and nothing in between. And that is so wrong. It's so faulty. There are so many different gender identities. There's two-spirit gender identity. There's, gender non-binary. There's people who identify, with one gender at some times in their life, and another, there's a fluidity of gender, right? So if we understand gender identity as a spectrum, then maybe she, her, hers would be on one side, and he, him, his would be on the other. And then there's all of this variance in between. And I think what we're seeing is that there tends to be still a cultural habit, I guess I want to say, of putting gender onto someone, right? So you might see me and assume that I'm a woman, and then refer to me as she or her, without really knowing whether or not that is how I identify. And so the movement to kind of give pronouns first, and to lead with that, and to say, I'm Daralyse and I go by she, her, hers, is really a way of sort of claiming allyship and affiliation with people who don't identify, right, with those pronouns. And it's also a way of, like sort of creating a space and an opportunity for people to tell their own pronouns as opposed to having those pronouns sort of thrust on them. So yeah, so we're seeing more and more of that. There's they, them pronouns. There's ZE is a pronoun that's given a lot of times. And some people say, I prefer not to go by any pronouns, and that's fine too. And then you just call that person by their name in any situation. And so I think like it's helpful. And there's so much, the LGBTQ community, really when it comes to spectrum understandings of gender identity and human sexuality, I think there's so much that other communities can borrow from that community in terms of really understanding that so many things exist on the spectrum, right? Like I'm biracial, so I exist in the spectrum between Black and white. And I think it's important for people to be able to make space both for themselves and for others for those spectrum understandings of identity.
Thank you for explaining to me. I actually grew up, I was unallowed to use pronouns. If I said she, my mom said, who are you talking about? They have a name. And so when I don't use a pronoun because I use a person's name, because I would get in trouble. I could not ever say, well, he said that. Who's he? I want the name. Like, and then not like my mom wanted the name to, but she just made me realize everyone's got a name. So it's interesting. So when I see that, we are coming to the end, but I wanted to, there is a whole nother conversation about how businesses really do implement the plan of training to make sure, and the importance of all of us speaking up when you see or hear something that and there's a nice way to do it, but you can, and I think I told you a story of when I said something about how, all people from Colombia, all the women are so beautiful, they're Spitfires. And I was called out on that because it was putting everyone in one bucket of their beauty and that they have passion. And I apologized, and it was good. So we really do need to be able to point someone out and say, oh, wait a second, let's think about what you said. Yeah. So how do you address that?
Yeah, so one of the things is, and I do, corporate diversity trainings, and usually, in those settings, like you really create a safe space for people to be able to talk about these issues, and then also to be able to sometimes there'll be a mix of like role playing, let's say, and I don't always love Zoom as a format for that, even though I do trainings on Zoom, but like I feel like, something is sometimes lost in terms of that heart connection. But yeah, I mean, I think that like anything else, right? Dr. Howard Stevenson, who's a leading expert in de-escalation training, and he works with various police officers, sort of preparing them for these heightened situations around race. But, he pointed out to me very early on in my work, he said, we expect people to learn algebra, and why should racial literacy and cultural competency be any different? We need to practice these skills, and we need to, and it's not enough to just sort of learn them once. We have to repeatedly go over them. And he also said, the thing is, and you can't just opt out because it makes you uncomfortable, right? Like you would never say to your fifth grader, like, okay, yeah, fractions make you uncomfortable, so you just don't have to do math for 6 months, and and you can pick back up when you're more comfortable. Like, no, these are skills, and we need to learn them, and we need to do the work. And so there's very sort of specific modules that I would use when working with a corporation, and they're often geared towards I like to kind of treat corporations like people almost, right? There's always a corporate culture. There's always an individuality. There's things that are working really well. There's things that aren't working very well. And so, we kind of look at like, well, what are the things that are going really well? What are the things that we can build on? And then what are the things that are pain points? What are the places where people are feeling very uncomfortable? And I find that, when corporations really start to do this work, they can start to operate ahead, right? It's like preventative medicine versus treating of symptoms, right? And so I always love when corporations call me in, and there might be like a few little symptoms, but we treat the symptoms, we address them, and then we start working on like, okay, well, how can we do preventative medicine? How can we really create a very healthy corporate culture so that you're thinking about serving people who haven't even arrived yet, right? Like the example I gave in terms of comedy sports and like doing closed captioning, like it wasn't that someone brought that up to us so that we're playing catch up and we have to accommodate a community that like, it's like, no, how do we innovate these things so that we can create this safe space? And another example I give is like, often I'll go into corporations and large corporations, I'll advise them to like, okay, well, can we think about setting up like a meditation or prayer room? Because what happens when a member of the Muslim American community comes to work and they want to have a prayer space? Like, are you going to put the onus on that person to create that or to have to ask for that? Or can you just like create a meditation space now so that when you hire someone who is a member of that faith, or you might even have someone working for you who's already a member of that faith, who's like going to the bathroom to pray because you haven't created this safe space and you haven't let it be known that you welcome, you know, members of any faith tradition, right? And so like those kinds of things are things that I do within corporations, and I find that it's really wonderful and uplifting, and the corporate culture always gets more exciting, and employee retention is a lot better. I mean, Monica mentioned sort of like this turnover rate, right? And the turnover rate at companies that do not make people feel valued is way higher than the turnover rate at companies that do. Because in those cases, people generally leave because of like, you know, a family issue or a change in life circumstance or whatever, but they don't want to leave that company because the company feels like a family almost. And so that's what I try to create.
I love that. I think every business needs to do that. Monica wrote, it's better than it used to be, but it still needs to be a great deal more diversity. Absolutely. Yes, having more personal investment for anyone who has the power. Absolutely. So many things and situations, an array of spectrum. This conversation needs to just continue. Daralyse, I'm sorry that we only had the hour, but SCORE is happy to be part of the conversation. I know on our, with our own onboarding with our mentors and whoever is volunteering for us, we do have a section, but even again, it's an open read and close. And so for every business out there, are you having a communication? Are you really talking about this? Is this part of your company culture? And if not, call Daralyse.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can contact me at daralyselyons.com or at demystifyingdiversitypodcast.com. And please do reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation and see if I can be supportive in any way, because I just really believe in this work. And I think that the more companies that are doing it, the more people that are doing it, just the better off this world becomes.
We should have really awards for companies that are doing it, like, locally, like our chambers should really honor the companies. And maybe that's something that we need to do, to really look at, like, just here in our local community of Daytona Beach and Volusia County, that we start to create a program that really addresses that. Leanne Shaw, to everyone, said this was excellent. Thank you, Daralyse. I can't wait I know, me too. I can't wait to tune into your podcast. I am really looking forward to that too, and sharing it. So everyone, thank you so much. We're going to have this on YouTube so you can share with your friends. And I think that we're going to ask Daralyse to come back in another month so that we can continue the conversation.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. And it was really great to be here with you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday. Be safe, everyone. Thank you. All right. SCORE is very happy to put this on, and we have some other workshops going on. So please continue to follow us. Thank you so much. We'll make sure everyone gets a copy of this recording and Daralyse's information. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Very